Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another inspiring episode of Desi Dynamos, Stories of Indian-American Trailblazers, Season 1. Today we are honored to introduce a brilliant historian, cultural scholar, and academic leader whose research and teaching have deepened our understanding of South Asia's rich history and global impact. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gita V. Pai, Professor of History and the Director of the International and Global Studies Program at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Born in Texas and raised in California by Indian immigrant parents, Dr. Pai's personal and academic journey embodies the global tapestry of South Asian heritage. With a Ph.D. from the University of California at Berkeley, her expertise spans the cultural, political, and religious histories of South Asia, with a special focus on gender, material culture, and colonization. Dr. Pai's groundbreaking research into South India's architectural and ritual traditions have been internationally recognized with her first book, Architecture of Sovereignty, Stone Bodies, Colonial Gazes, and Living Gods in South India, published by the Cambridge University Press in 2023. Her current project, In Pursuit of Dancing Shiva, promises to shed new light on one of India's most iconic cultural treasures. Throughout her career, Dr. Pai has received numerous prestigious fellowships, including a Fulbright Nehru Scholarship, and has taught at institutions such as the UC Berkeley, sharing her passion for South Asian history with students around the world. She is also a dedicated mentor and an educator par excellence, inspiring a new generation to explore the history that shapes our present. Ladies and gentlemen, a woman who has made a mark, starting late in life, picking up and reaching the end point so fast. Without much ado, let's welcome a true Desi Dynamo, the versatile, the wonderful Dr. Gita V. Pai. Hello, Doctor. How are you, Gita?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for that generous introduction and for having me here.
Very proud, Gita, of you and your work and the legacy that you are leaving for the entire diaspora. You have an extensive academic background. I'm so proud to read each word of your resume, with degrees in South Asian studies and a designated emphasis on women, gender, sexuality. Gita, what first sparked your interest in South Asian history, and how did your early life experiences shape decisions to pursue this field?
Thank you for that question. To answer it, I think it will be helpful to begin with some information about my family. I'm the firstborn child of immigrants. My parents left their small villages of Kollam and Palipuram in South India and immigrated to the United States during the early 1960s so that my father could study for his Ph.D. in biochemistry. Prior to his arrival, along with his brother, my father juggled the responsibility of running the family's small coffee stall, performing odd jobs, and helping to take care of their 7 brothers and sisters after my grandfather became blind. Yet amidst all of these duties, my father studied with resolve and focus to stand first in Travancore State, which is what Kerala was known before independence from British rule, and received a gold medal and earned a scholarship at the University of Texas in Austin. So my father's meager graduate student stipend in the US meant living in government housing projects, subsisting on food stamps, hand washing cloth diapers, and dressing my sister and me in hand-me-downs from his professor's children. And so although my father found his situation in America an immense improvement over his poverty-stricken upbringing, money was still tight. And so in those early years, he could not afford to buy 4 airline tickets for his family of 4 to travel to India. And therefore, I never met my maternal grandfather, who passed away from a heart attack when I was 4.
This is sad.
Yeah, but he remained ever present through the stories my mother would share about him. And I learned that his hobby was to sculpt. He liked to create Hindu deities out of the coconut wood from his plantation, such as Vishnu. And I have one that I keep on my desk, and I'll show you to you right here.
Oh, that's amazing. He was a sculptor.
Yeah, out of coconut wood, and which my mother managed to find in the attic of her childhood home in Pallipuram, and brought it back for me. So in addition to Hindu deities, he also created historical figures out of clay busts of Mohandas K. Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Bal Gangadhar Tilak. And I believe that I was inadvertently drawn to South Asian history in general because of my maternal grandfather. And I feel like I'm carrying on his legacy through creations of my own, through the articles and books that I write about South Asia. I was drawn to study Southeast India in particular. Although my parents are from Kerala, my ancestors from Goa, and my mother tongue is Konkani, because of my childhood experiences accompanying my parents to Tamil film screenings at the University of California, Berkeley. You know, as immigrants, and this is prior to the establishment of regional and linguistic associations in the San Francisco Bay Area, my parents were hungry and desperate for some South Indian cultural experience. And so I would sit in Grinnell Hall's dark and large auditorium, staring at this huge screen, entranced by the images of the Tamil landscape and the sound of the Tamil language. So much so, much later, I eventually studied Tamil from the very professors who hosted those screenings, Professors George and Kausalya Hart. And I studied about the region's literary, religious, and political history as a graduate student at UC Berkeley, much to the dismay of my Kerala relatives. I also think that my father's particular interest in Tamil culture shaped my decision. Prior to coming to the US, my father conducted scientific research at the Christian Medical Center in Vellore, and spoke fondly of his time in the area. He was also an avid enthusiast of South Indian Carnatic music, who had the ability to identify ragas, and he spoke lovingly about the sweetness of the language.
This is amazing. I get goosebumps just thinking of your journey and the legacy that you bring to the table. It was your maternal grandfather who just rubbed it off on you and all those experiences. Gita, it's such a wonderful thing to pick up your values. You know, you were not born in the country, you were born here. But, you know, you come up with the values of a country that is so ingrained in the legacy of your ancestors, and the way you have taken it ahead is wonderful. In your course at the UW-La Crosse, you emphasize a multidisciplinary approach to studying history. See, basically, you're a professor of history. You incorporate literary, visual, historic, and cinematic text into your teachings. It's very different from the regular teacher that you have for history. Gita, could you share how this teaching, the philosophy that you've adapted, evolved, and how it helps students to understand complex historical narratives?
That's a great question. My training and coursework in South Asian Studies at UC Berkeley was interdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary by choice. I took classes in art history, religious studies, history in languages, so I learned Tamil, Sanskrit, and Hindi. I took classes in anthropology. And I did this from some of the leading scholars of South Asia. UC Berkeley is one of the hubs for South Asian studies in the United States. And so this interdisciplinarity is evident in my teaching. I engage in anthropological, historical, philosophical, sociological, and literary approaches that open more fully the study of South Asia to a closer analysis and deeper understanding for students. And I should say that most of my students have no ties to the region. They are not of South Asian descent. This interdisciplinary is also evident in my research. My recently published book on the Meenakshi Temple in Madurai and my manuscript in progress about Shiva Nataraj demonstrate my ability to think across the conventional disciplinary lines of religious studies, history, cultural anthropology, and art history.
That's wonderful. I was looking at the book that you've written, Architecture of Sovereignty. It's a solid title, the really solid sovereign title. It's a monograph, isn't it? You've written about stone bodies, colonial gazes, and living gods in South India. This particular monograph, it dwells into the historical transformation of a temple, that is the Meenakshi Temple in Madurai, which is iconic and historic. What motivated you, Gita, sitting here so far away in the United States, what motivated you to reach Meenakshi Ammal and the story that reflects the larger theme of sovereignty, gender, and cultural tourism in South Asia? Since you're not even from Tamil Nadu, and Konkani is the language that your mother speaks, but still, the Tamil, going to a temple that is totally soaked in Tamil culture. What made you go there?
My interest in the Meenakshi Temple began on a hot and humid day in August in 2001. So before my stay in Madurai to learn Tamil ended. So I learned Tamil at the university, but I also learned it in Madurai. And so before that session, that summer session ended, I wanted to see the royal portrait sculpture located inside the inside the Meenakshi Sundareshwara temple, in a place called the Pudu Mandapam, and that's translated into English from Tamil as New Hall. And it was the topic of a paper that I wrote for a Religion of South India course at UC Berkeley before actually visiting it. Wow. So I wanted to see it. So I waited near the temple's towering south gateway. I was clutching a handwritten note for the temple's executive officer because I needed his permission to enter it, because where those portrait sculptures are situated is kept locked to the general public. And so after convincing him to allow me to enter that pillared hall's central portion that's kept locked throughout the year, except when religious festivals occur within it, I, acclimated to this dark, cavernous interior, and I walked across its dusty granite floor, and I gazed upward at the stone statue of Madurai's Nayaka rulers. And surrounding that inner portion was the bustling noise from the commercial activity. And these were small stalls that had been installed in that area around it. And so it was encircling this inner portion that's kept locked, but that's where the rituals occur. And so I was just marveling at this life-size, full-figured images that were just projecting from these colossal columns. And they were unlike anything I had seen of earlier depictions of South Indian kings. And so that visit confirmed a fascination in early modern Nayaka historiography. And that paper that I wrote inspired my book. So the book itself, the book itself traces the historical transformations of the Pudumandapam, which is a religious structure at the Meenakshi Temple. And as you know, Madurai is a major pilgrimage town in Tamil Nadu. And so from various stages in South Indian history, the site has, what I argue, has symbolically encoded the power of several regimes as far back as the Nayaka rule in the 17th century. And so I read those layers of political power as embodied in the architecture and in the sculpture in and around the site. And so I rely on a variety of sources. This includes temple manuscripts and legends written in Tamil, physical architecture, the sculpture, the ritual itself that occurs there, the rituals, I should say, letters, travelogues, bronze models, paintings, drawings, photographs, and interviews. And I do this because to employ a multidisciplinary approach to illustrate how various influence have converged to shape this temple site.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and simply put, I think the book demonstrates how the site's art and architecture have been put to different uses towards different ends by different rulers from the early more modern times when the Nayaka rulers, whose ancestors came from the Andhra region as local Telugu-speaking governors to rule on behalf of the Vijayanagar king in Karnataka, who slowly rose themselves to become kings in their own right. And so one ruler in particular, Tirumala Nayaka, who's the one who built the site, as a devotee of Vishnu and as a devotee of a Vaishnava goddess named Andal, wanted to, who's a poetess and goddess from the nearby Srivilliputtur, wanted to transplant a ritual that's done to her that's called Enekapa, which is oil bathing or application of oil that's done to Andal. And the ruler, who was, a Vaishnavite himself, ruling in Madurai that had a predominantly Shaivite population, its main temple is the one devoted to Shiva and Meenakshi, transplants that ritual at the Madurai temple such that it's the only temple devoted to Shiva where this kind of worship to a goddess takes place. And that's where I explore the issues of gender and sovereignty in a particular chapter where I analyze that ritual. And so that's the stone bodies part of the title, very simply. The colonial gaze is where I look at the site through, during British colonialism, through the draftsmen, the artists, the painters and the photographers who visited and documented what they saw visually. And I also examine the site during the post-colonial period as it's being transformed into a cultural touristic site, which is driven by global tourism. So my book is a wide-ranging work.
Wonderful. Gita, I don't know whether you know, but your Meenamma was conceived in Madurai, as what my mother told me, and named after the goddess. So, every time I go to that temple, I feel the goosebumps of spiritual presence. When you're entering the Garbhagudi or the Dwara, did you ever feel, was it a historian that was entering and looking at the statues as a historian would, or was there an Indian girl who was feeling a connect with the spiritual life that her ancestors might have had?
That's a great question. And I tell people that there are very few places for me when I enter that I feel that there's a certain vibration, right? Yeah. And I feel it when I'm at the Meenakshi Temple. And that's where I remove the historian part of my identity, and I become this, I'm the devotee of this goddess. And in fact, I have her statue behind my computer because I am a great admirer and devotee of her as well, it's just one of my favorite places. In India to be.
Wonderful. Meenakshi, and then Shiva. What a strong personality in the diaspora for India, the pantheon of gods. Your upcoming book, In Pursuit of Dancing Shiva. This book explores one of India's most iconic cultural treasures. And could you give us a glimpse on the challenges and surprises that you've encountered by tracing the history of the symbol across the dynasty, the politics, art, and global crime? See, you stay in a faraway country, 10,000 miles away. You come and you try to get back knowledge of your culture and a god as powerful as the dancing Shiva. So tell us more about that book.
It's a manuscript in progress. To best answer your question, I will share how I became interested in the topic. And so, until March 2014, a visitor to the National Gallery of Australia's Art of the Indian Subcontinent section would encounter a 12th century bronze statue of the Hindu god Shiva in his dancing form, or Nataraja, on display, prominently on display at its entry. Yeah. And so the museum had bought this Chola period piece, and the Chola period is roughly the 9th to the 12th century in Tamil Nadu. They had bought it from a New York-based art dealer called Subhash Kapoor in 2008 and paid $5 million for it.
Can you believe that? Okay.
But they learned in 2018 that the statue had been stolen from a village temple in Tamil Nadu in 2006.
Oh.
So Kapoor stands accused by the US government, the Manhattan District Attorney, Government of India, and the Tamil Nadu state government of looting and trafficking over $145 million worth of Indian antiquities.
Oh, God.
In September 2014, the Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, visited India and personally returned the Nataraj statue to Prime Minister Narendra Modi during a state visit. So from this example, we see that the theft of Hindu artifacts, often of dancing Shivas, is a serious problem. And I think I was surprised that a museum would go through extensive and haphazard lengths to acquire a bronze depiction of Nataraja. And I say haphazard because they did not do a proper check on the object's provenance. And that means to trace the history of ownership from the time the artwork was created until it enters the museum's collection. So I wanted to know, why do museums with South Asia collection desire images of Nataraja? And why has this particular icon come to stand for India and Hinduism in a global imagination?
Wow.
And so, as you're aware, Nataraja depicts the deity's cosmic dance or dance of bliss called Ananda-Tandavam. Ananda-Tandava in Sanskrit, which symbolizes his endless creation, preservation, destruction of the universe. However, many abroad are oblivious to the implications of Shiva's metamorphosis from a sacred living image in temples into this rarefied emblem of culture in museums. And so my book, In Progress, In Pursuit of Dancing Shiva, focuses on Shiva Nataraja's transformation through history and in various contexts. And I began with Tamil devotional poetry from the 7th century, And then I also include much later on how the Shiva figure has been made iconic for a broad audience through influential thinkers, artists in the 20th century. And their enthusiastic appraisals boosted its popularity in the West, enhanced its value as a work of art and antiquity in the world market, and established it as a symbol of India.
Wow. Gita, now the monograph and the book that you're writing, are they available for public view, or is it only a research identity or a journal that will be for research and development?
Oh, no, it will be made for public view. Like my first book has already been published by Cambridge University Press, and it's available for purchase. And this too will also be available for purchase once I finish writing it and submit it to an academic university press, which I haven't decided on yet.
So we will have to buy it through the press, or can we pick it up on Amazon or some common site?
You can do both.
Wonderful. I wish you all the best. I'm sure it would be a great read. But, looking back, history is a very exciting subject. And colonization of the British rule and, the colonies created, they were all over. The Britishers were just all over. And what they did, the trajectory of the world changed because of the way they thought and the colonization in different parts of the world. And even now, many people are suffering that effect. But colonization and post and pre-colonization are like central themes in your work. Every time you talk about the British influence, whether it is Meenakshi or Shiva, how, because they played a very large part in history in different parts of the world. And in India, they lasted a few hundred years. So, how do you navigate this complex and sensitive topic? Even today, there's always a debate between India and Great Britain on how much you've taken away from us or, give it back to us. But particularly in a classroom, to ensure that students grasp the lasting impact of colonial rule on modern South Asia. How do you manage to navigate into their mind and teach them the effects of colonization?
Another great question. One way is through examples, and I will give an example through a different European power that was also in India and that involved my own ancestors. As I mentioned before, I belong to one of the several hundred groups in ethnically and culturally diverse India called the Konkanis, which is an ethno-linguistic community from southwestern India that once had interactions with the Portuguese beginning in the 1500s. And so in order to colonize the region called Goa and convert its inhabitants, the Portuguese colonial government engaged in systematic attempts to erase the Konkani people of their beliefs and cultural identity. And they did this by imposing anti-Hindu laws, destroying temples, banning the speaking of Konkani in schools, and burned all written material such that today there is no script. And so in order to preserve their pre-colonial roots and maintain their indigenous traditions, persecuted Konkanis fled farther south and built new communities where generations later, my parents were born in the state now called Kerala, and my in-laws in the state of Karnataka. And so, a lasting impact of that colonial rule is the permanent elimination of a Konkani script. We have to use, Devanagari or the Kannada script or the Malayalam script to write Konkani. And so one impact is that we don't have a script. And also another impact is the development of these diasporic Konkani communities throughout South India. So I know you asked about British, but I think that I decided that I think answering it through a different European power is just
Portuguese. But Gita, you just opened up an entire Pandora's box. You can write about the ancestors, your ancestors, the Portuguese connection. Oh my God, there's so much left for Gita to go and, tell us all about. But, now that you are in your mind stuck with the gods, we're talking about your work, your books, your research, your history, it intersects history with material and visual culture. There's always a god, a stone statue or an urn or a historical, some embellishment that is there. Could you talk about how studying such physical bodies like temple architecture, scriptures, or icons, how can they provide unique insights into the history and cultural landscape of South Asia? It has been your path.
Thank you. I feel it is important to evaluate broad range of perspectives and to accumulate wisdom from the breadth of human experience in order to gain a fuller picture of what I'm investigating. So therefore, I collect data in 3 ways in my current project on Shiva Nataraj. I conduct archival research, which means, examining historical documents housed, for example, at the National Archives of India in New Delhi, the Tamil Nadu State Archives in Chennai, the Danish National Archives in Copenhagen, and of course, the British Library in London. So one way is archival research. Second, I engage in object-driven research, examining, for example, Chola period bronze statues in museums around the world to understand how the revelation of legally and ethically questionable circumstances has affected museums, this whole issue of collecting and dealing in art, and what are the possible meanings of restitution or returning these cultural artifacts back to
the origin.
Yeah, to their temples or to their place of origin. And the third thing is I perform ethnographic research, allowing me through interviews to gain insights about the on-the-ground local perspectives in Tamil Nadu regarding, the illicit trade of cultural property. What are the current lives of these snatched Nataraja statues in and out of their temple homes? And what about the lives of the Tamil villagers as they await the permanent return of their missing gods? And I have to say that these stolen statues, once they're brought back, these stolen temple images, they're kept in a locked and guarded facility because of the ongoing legal case against the art dealer, right? But they do visit the village during Arudra Darshanam, which is, a Hindu festival in Kerala and Tamil Nadu that celebrates the cosmic dance of Shiva, and they come back for those 2 or 3 days under heavy police protection, and so villagers have to deal with seeing the gods they would worship daily only for a few days in a year. I've actually been to the villages and seen the enthusiasm that they have, right, for the return, although it's very brief, the return of their gods.
Yeah, there's a lot of religious fervor, especially in the villages, when it comes to the idols, because when they consecrate these idols, there is so much of spiritual energy. And, when people come together and good souls get together, anywhere, whether it's a church or a mosque or a temple, there is always so much purity in it. So, that is the symbol, whichever symbol you're holding on to, what you see is what you believe in. So it's wonderful that you are able to link. Since you're now, we're teaching in a foreign country, in the American area, you must have many students belonging to different parts of the world also interested in the topics that you're doling out. So, I'm sure that in a way you are actually doing service to us Indians, because you're telling them the story of our country, our great legacy, our traditions. And I'm so proud that the part of a diaspora here is giving back the history of the world to, beautiful children of the future of another country. Thank you so much, Gita. But as a professor and director of the International and Global Studies program, you have the opportunity to mentor many young scholars. What advice do you give to children who want to study history, especially students interested in pursuing studies and careers in history of South Asian studies that you specialize in? And how do you hope to influence the next generation of scholars in your field of excellence?
Of course, studying history is great for academic and teaching careers, and I support my students who choose that path. But even students who study the past as undergraduates tend to excel in their careers, whether it is business, journalism, law, politics, diplomacy, communication, criminal justice, because studying history offers a wide range of transferable and also in-demand skills. And these are developed in the history major, like synthesizing and organizing large amounts of information, making sense out of historical documents, analyzing contemporary developments through historical lens, communicating clearly and effectively, orally and in writing. Now, when any of my students is interested in pursuing a career in South Asian studies, I tell them that South Asian studies is ever more important today, given that South Asia's presence in the global limelight has rapidly expanded. The region's economies are some of the fastest growing in the world, and India continues to shape global technological, cultural, and economic trends. And even foreign policy initiatives towards the region are gradually gaining relevance in light of India's strategic alliances with both the US and Russia. And so even within the US, the significance of South Asia and its people is increasing. Now, our population is rising rapidly, in part because of what happened today in history, and that's on October 3rd, 1965. President Lyndon B. Johnson, a fellow Texan sitting near the Statue of Liberty, signed into law the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 that finally lifted a 90-year ban on immigration from Asia. And because of that, there are more than, I think, 6.1 million individuals in the US who trace their heritage to South Asia. And we are increasingly gaining global representation, with even the 2024 Democratic presidential nominee being of South Asian descent, who through her mother has Tamil roots.
Fabulous. What a coincidence that we are recording this session on October 3rd. We were destined to talk about today. The Indian diaspora is the largest group of immigrant influences into the United States of America. And our Indian brothers and sisters have been doing very, very well in different fields and all for different reasons. I have been speaking to a number of people on my show, and for the first time I talked to a historian. I always felt history was a boring subject, but I just realized every historian is a storyteller. Oh my God, you have facts that can create so much of imagination, so that a child who's sitting in front of you can actually glean in a very beautiful manner, the graphic stories that centuries of invasions, of kings, of gods, of their, antiquity can give you, the dream of the great Indians. So this wonderful interview has become so meaningful for me. I've gleaned so many things, Gita, from you, especially one thing is that history is not a boring subject. History is a story, that's the only true story that a man can talk about. Thank you so much, Gita, for being here. And in leaving the studio, what are the 3 things that you would like to say to the Indians in the United States? How they are, how they could possibly impact, and how they can better the community?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, I think, I ended with the example of our Democratic presidential nominee being of South Asian descent. I think that as a group, and I think it's important that we become more politically involved in the local political landscape. And I think by doing that, we will increase our we will increase our not only our representation, but also increase our visibility, and also have a greater say in how things are done here in the country. So I think that's the advice that I would give.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pai. It was a wonderful, wonderful session. And I say, Jai Hind, Vande Mataram, keep the flag flying in the comity of the nations. We are really proud of you and your work. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.